Welcome to the Surviving to Thriving podcast that helps women leaders in nonprofits get out of survival mode and thrive in both leadership and life. I'm your host, leadership development coach Kathy Archer, and I help women leaders enjoy impactful leadership. Have you ever hesitated before asking for money? Gone to a fundraising event or knew you had to ask for corporate fundraising, or perhaps ask your boss for a raise? Any kind of money conversation. Does that make you feel a little bit uncomfortable? Then you are in for a treat, because today we are talking to Heather Nelson, who is a corporate fundraising coach, mentor. She helps you learn how to ask for money, the strategies, and helps you walk you through it. So today we're going to talk to Heather about the 3-step strategy for courageous fundraising conversations. On to the show now. Welcome to the show, Heather. We are going to talk about those courageous money conversations. And in a minute, we're going to get to the 3 steps that help us do that. But tell everybody a little bit about yourself, how you got to where you are, and what it is you do now.
Thanks, Kathy. I'm excited about this conversation. It's going to be fun. And I know that comes across as weird because a lot of people don't think talking about money is fun, right? It's like the worst thing. And you know what? It's, if someone had told me that was going to be like my thing when I was a kid or even into my 20s, I would have said, no way, right? No way. Because I started my professional career in the nonprofit sector, and I've always worked in the nonprofit sector from the very start. And at the beginning, I was in the program side of things. I was involved in international development, traveling to other countries, working in community development projects, that sort of thing, staff management, and, nothing to do with money, really. And at some point along the way, I decided I wanted to go back to school. And I started looking at different options about going back to school. And I really always felt like a generalist, and I couldn't commit. I couldn't commit to a master's in one thing. And so gradually I found myself in my master's of business administration at Schulich School of Business, which had nonprofit.
Did you start in a different, did you take training in something different before you went and did all this other stuff?
No, I mean, I took my undergrad in an unrelated field like many of us, and then, kind of went into the charitable sector. And it was only when I said, hey, I want to go back to school. I want to advance my education. And really the next thing I did was sign up for my MBA.
That's great.
And with 2 feet, right? But what I discovered there was that there was some people who spent an enormous amount of time thinking about money and planning for money, and that that there was some real advantages that could be found there. And I always knew I was going to go back to the nonprofit sector, but now I was honing skills around how people who are working in the business sector think and what's important to them, and what's important to those businesses, and that lingo became very comfortable. And so when I went back to working and I became a fundraiser and sort of immersed myself in the fundraising world, it was sort of then combining my belief in cause and charity and working in the nonprofit sector with some of these skills that I developed by being around the business school, lingo, things like that. And so
I don't know if you can share, names or places or stuff, but can you tell us a little story about a big ask that you did?
Sure. I mean, once I got back to food, into the charitable sector, I was at Food Banks Canada. And that's where I really started focusing on corporate fundraising, which is what I specialize in now, what I work in exclusively now. And at the beginning, it was, it came naturally in some ways, and then in other ways it was not. And I do remember sort of the good and bad first story is that I had a meeting with, a big Canadian company, and I was super excited, and I did all the prep, all the preparation. I had all the points. I practiced it at home. I had the best outfit. I had it all thought through. It was going to go perfect. And then I get there, and very unusually, the actual senior person met me to walk me to which almost never happens.
Yeah.
Usually somebody else. But anyway, this case, it was the senior VP that met me in the lobby, and we had like 10 minutes or so together.
Wow.
Before the meeting, to like elevator, hallway,
Yeah.
all this whole thing.
And are you like sweating bullets at this point?
And I had no idea what to talk about during that
Yeah.
time. I had no plan. I had not thought this through at all. And I do like chatting with people, but like it was like I couldn't think of a thing. Like it was weather and traffic, and I barely knew what organization I worked for all of a sudden. I was like, it was brutal. And I think back on that story a lot, because that did turn into a great partnership. And there was a million more meetings with that organization. Yeah. And while I remember that, I'm pretty safe to say that they would not remember that part of the meeting or that part of the relationship, that we moved on 100% from there. And so, I mean, I think it just reminds us that, these, no matter how much you prepare, things can happen on one hand. But on the other hand, that, that's such a insignificant moment for everyone else is something that I can keep playing over and over in my head. But so that was an early one, and it worked out really well. And I think what was clear back then is that it was a long road, right? Like any of my big asks have almost all been long roads. You build to that. It's not, I think I always joke that people who aren't fundraisers think that the first thing we do is walk in the door and say, "Hi, excuse me, can you give me $100,000 or whatever?" And what is the truth is that, you usually spend a ton of time with the person or the company and get to know what they want and what they are looking for and how you can meet that need, and all kinds of things happen. And then at some point there's a conversation about money.
I want to go back to a minute, because I know some of the women listening, just as you said that, their stomachs are, when you actually throw out that $100,000 number, they're like, oh my God, I can never ask for $100,000. But what is it that when people come to you, they say something to you? You've told me this. What is it they say to you when they sort of pick up the phone and say, "Oh my God, Heather, I need help"?
I don't know. Usually when they call, it's not about a specific situation.
Yeah.
Usually it's, we need more money as an organization. And then, we talk through what that looks like. And usually the thought at the beginning is like, what's the strategy? What's the message? What are we going to say?
Yeah.
What are we going to write to have that conversation? And, as we get to know each other and spend more time together, then we go from there into more of a conversation where we really try to figure out what their obstacle is. Like, is it really that you don't know the message? Is it really that what is the real problem here? But when we talk about money, for sure, one of my pieces of advice is them telling me what they think the number is and they think it is. And they do often ask me to set the number. Like it's, I have like a secret file that says this exact number. If you say this number, the person will say yes. Right? But the truth is that part of it is saying a number that you believe is the right number, and that you believe is a number that your organization can back up and provide value for. So I do get them to say it out loud, because I think sometimes that, even saying it out loud to me requires a big deep breath. And if me, who's on your team and your cheerleader and your person in your corner, you have a bit of a moment of pause, then if there's an intimidating individual on the other side of that conversation, then that pause is going to be bigger. And then if they sense that you're not sure about what you're saying, then that's where there's more likely to be, pushback or a harder negotiation.
Which is why we called this Courageous Money Conversations, because I think, so for those of you who've been following the podcast, we've been talking about competence. You have to develop the skills before you start to feel confident. But in the middle of those two is this courageous action. And it's sometimes you know what you're supposed to do, you know what you need to ask for, who you need to call, you need to set up a meeting, you need to build a relationship, whatever, you have to do all of that. But yeah, you hold yourself back. And so, what is it? Let's talk about the 3 steps, Heather. What are the 3 steps to have those courageous money conversations? Because yeah, we often get stuck in that sort of fear, fight, flight mode. Oh my God, I don't want to say the number. I don't want to go to this meeting. And then yeah, you mumble it, or you say it probably quieter than you need to, or at the last minute you reduce it even though the number should be higher, or just starting that conversation. So let's jump into the 3 steps. What's the first step?
Yeah. Or I want to just add one more thing, or you avoid it.
Yes.
Right. So you don't even go have the conversation. You put it in an email.
Fight, flee. You're like, avoid it. Yes.
I like, how many times have I had the conversation where the recommendation is, okay, you're going to have a meeting, you're going to talk it through, you're going to build up to it. And then I find out, oh, well, I just wrote that all in an email and I sent it. I was like,
we have to hide behind the computer, right?
Yeah. It's not the same.
No.
It really isn't the same. So let's start with, the 3 steps. So let's start with one of them, I believe, is a bit of a mindset one around vision, right? So you really need to want what's on the other side. Yeah. And that can be, in this case, the specific relationship or, yes, from the person you're asking for the money. But I also think it's like the vision of who you are and what you're doing.
Yes.
And I think, to the point of, I'm pretty sure if you're fleeing and avoiding the meeting, you're not feeling good.
You're not feeling it.
Right? No. You're not feeling good about it. So it is, when you're in that gap between competence and confidence and really having a lot of experience, you do have to, you have to do this without all the experience. I mean, there is a moment in time where you're doing this for the first time. I had my first time. I did not know what I was going to say. I didn't know how it was going to work. I didn't know what all could go wrong. I had that first time, just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And it's only now that I've done those kinds of conversations thousands of times that I don't think twice about it. Right.
Well, it's the 10,000 hour rule, right? Like you have to do it. And I think that's the thing. You have to be willing to fail, to fumble, to fall, and still do it. Amy Cuddy talks about it as fake it till you become it. Mm-hmm. And so it's not really like, I'm pretending. It's that you are learning to get to there. And if you're not practicing, the confident voice, the body posture, the looking them in the eye, and practicing saying the number, you'll never get there. But yeah, you got to have that vision of what there is.
That's right. And I think too, an understanding that, I've heard you say this before about leadership. There's not one version of a leader. Well, there's not one version of a conversation like this that works.
No.
Right? There actually isn't a secret file that I have that says this, if you did these things, it's the perfect thing.
In this order.
Always work. Right? Like there is a certain amount of different people react to different things in different ways. Different comments will land. Also, you want to have a vision of how you want it to look. I do believe that. And I think you need to believe that you can get to the other side, or you can gain the experience to be the confident asker. I mean, you do have to have that on some level. But I also think you need to have a sense that this is not a one and done situation, right? Like, people put this enormous amount of pressure on themselves, I find, with this sort of thing where they're like, I've got the call. As if that is the only call that can ever happen. Yeah. And it's like, no, you've got a call and that is fantastic. Let's think about what can happen in that call. And, if that one doesn't work perfectly, that's okay. You'll tell me what happens and we'll come up with some next steps based on what happens, I
want to jump in with another example because we're talking about money right now. Janice Cunning and I were talking about competence the other day, and it'll be one of these podcasts as well. But we were talking about avoiding conflict. And I think it's the same thing. Often people avoid conflict because it's that one conversation. It's not one conversation. It's a
Right.
series of conversations where you're building a relationship. And so having the
Yes.
courage to get through one and not doing it perfectly, but getting through one, taking some lessons from that, doing it again, it's a process. And that's this whole piece around courage. It's the courage to fail, the courage to mess up, the courage to not get it right the first time or the third time or the fifth time, but the persistence to stay there.
That's right. And that's why I guess I started with this first story you asked me about the big ask, and I
Yeah,
turned that into, well, it was a long journey, right?
exactly.
And that's the truth of the matter, is that in most cases it's a long journey and it's a relationship. And so if you put so much pressure on any one moment in that relationship, then of course
Yeah.
you lack confidence. Any of us would lack confidence, I think, in a situation when we were told this is the only time you
Oh,
could talk to this person. It
yeah,
has to be perfect,
yeah,
right? I mean, that's just not how it works. When you're
yeah,
having money conversations, it is most often a series of conversations
yeah,
and a series of actions on your part and a series of activities. And so, you're going to, you know, hopefully not mess up it, too much that you can't recover from it. Like, and I think
right.
I have, in all the people I've ever talked to and all the meetings I've ever, all the coaches, all the clients, there's nobody who's come to me and said, this is what happened, I can never speak to this person again. Right? Like, that's not what
I have
happens. It's
I have to
like,
tell you a quick story, Heather. I was coaching somebody yesterday who is a leader in one of the large airlines. And she said, I always tell my people, you cannot make a mistake that's not fixable. And I'm like, okay, this is airlines. Like, what are you talking about? She's like, unless you park the plane in somebody's backyard. I'm like, that's the only mistake you think of? But in her mind, there's no unfixable mistake, right? Like, you learn
Right.
from it. And I thought, well, if the airlines can take that attitude, certainly the rest of us probably can too. So
Right.
yeah, I thought it was kind of
Yes,
cool. All right,
exactly.
take us to step two.
Right. Well, it really does relate closely, because I talk about micro steps. I talk about this
Yeah,
all the time when I'm talking about both planning the relationship and progress in the relationship. I try to talk about thinking about what the next thing that you want to happen is, and instead of focusing all the time
the
on the
big,
vision,
yeah,
let's bring it closer, right? So on one hand, our first point was, yes, have a vision of where you
yeah,
are at
yeah,
the end,
yeah,
and then the next step is, okay, but at the end of the day, there's all these little steps, so really all you need to know is what you want to happen next.
yeah. And
And
teeny tiny little steps.
that's right. So next might be the email where you give them one more piece of
Yeah,
information, or the next step might be a meeting that adds another person into the equation,
yeah,
or some piece of follow up that you need to do. Or if let's say the meeting did go badly, and in my case that means that there doesn't seem that there's an alignment. Then the
right.
next step might be something to just stay in touch,
Yeah,
right? Send them a link, follow them on LinkedIn, like some little thing that just
yeah.
keeps the contact alive, because maybe there'll be an opportunity down the road,
Mm-hmm.
right? So whenever we're talking about money converse courageous money
Yeah, yeah,
conversation,
yeah,
we try to bring that back to, even if even if this is the moment where you're having it, then the next step could be a thank you letter.
yeah,
It could be something very warm and friendly, so you don't
yeah,
have to stay in the place, which is perhaps more anxiety inducing, if that is in fact the case for you.
yeah,
You can move out of that place and into one that's about education, or is about appreciation or gratitude, all places where many of us feel more comfortable.
yeah,
And so breaking it down into these micro steps allows us to not just think about the company or the funder or the donor or the boss
yes,
as like the holder of the money, but as like this, full
yeah,
person or organization
yes,
with whom you have many different kinds of steps that you take in your
yeah.
relationship. And focusing on micro steps, I think, just makes it feel much, much more manageable.
Yeah, I mean, one of the things, I was talking to somebody yesterday and I said, what's the next thing you need to do? And they're like, send the email. And I'm like, is that really the next step? Or is there some research you need to do before you send the email? And they're like, yes, there is. And I'm like, that's what goes on your to-do list then, not the email. Because when you put the email on your list, again, you're putting that pressure about, oh, this person isn't going to like what I'm saying, or they're not going to, but you don't even know what you're saying yet. Like you haven't got the data yet. So stop taking it 3 or 4 steps down the road and stressing yourself out, and bring it back to what is the micro, teeny tiny, littlest next step.
And I think that that's especially true when we're talking about the money conversation, because we're not going to start there.
No.
Right. So if you're stopping yourself from calling somebody, for example, or emailing them for the meeting, or to introduce yourself.
Yeah.
Because all you can think about is, I'm eventually going to ask this person for money. But you should be planning to do that on the first outreach anyway. So if you can take that off the table, and then you start with, well, my goal on this first call is to get to know this person, maybe ask a few questions and get a few answers.
Yeah.
That's a very nice manageable micro step. And then once you start getting more information, at some point you're going to determine, yes, this is the time to ask for money. And I mean, that's one of the things we work through when we build a strategy. My client and I will say, okay, we figured out that there's good alignment here. And they want me to say, okay, now how much? And instead I'm like, okay, well, what questions do we need to ask them?
Right.
We need to know what value we can provide. We need to know what kinds of things they might want, what problems they're experiencing. And then we can get a better idea based on that knowledge what the number might be. And if we're doing it right, by the time we get there, they're actually all ready to give you that money.
And I feel like when you're doing these micro steps too, that it's like asking yourself, is this like a task micro step, or is this a relationship micro step? Right? Like, do I need to send an email, schedule a call, or do I need to, follow them on LinkedIn, comment on a post, send them a card, ask them how their dog's doing, like whatever it is, there's those little pieces. And it's like part of that vision piece, I think, for people, again, is sort of tangible. I want the check, but it's not, what relationship are we building so that we get ongoing checks and they're committed? Maybe they'll then sit on our board, or, then they'll talk to their friends about it too, because they're so passionate about it. Like, what is it? Why are we asking this particular company to get involved? It's not about the money. It's about what the money can do, right?
Exactly. And that's why, when we're developing a script, which is another thing we do, is like so much of the script is questions and answers, and offering ways that we're aligning and talking about values. And that's like the bulk of the conversation. And so the actual courageous money conversation comes out of strengthening relationship and building trust and aligning values.
So just what you said there, I want people to go back to episode number 7, because we talked about competence and we talked about the need to practice. And I love that you're saying there's a script. I'm not going to feel confident talking in a meeting if I haven't prepared and had the opportunity to practice. So I think that leads us into step 3. What's step 3?
It totally leads us into step 3, right? Which is asking for help, right? And that help can take on a variety of different forms. So for sure, at the very, sort of easiest, least expensive, all of those things, like practice with a peer in your organization, a peer that does the same thing that you do. That's easy. And especially at the beginning, when you're trying to develop that experience muscle, this is super important. Like practicing role playing or talking through what happens if, we could ask questions. The person can kind of respond to you and really see like, what do you think in the moment? Take you places like, kind of sort of the more challenging spot or the very right? For sure. On a professional level, there's coaches and mentors, and I've had both paid, hired, and contracted coach and mentor in this space, as well as more voluntary, or people I've identified as coaches and mentors
Yeah.
and asked for help. So those people are available. And one of the biggest compliments I get sometimes is I got an email the other day from one of my clients, hadn't worked with in a while. And she's like, well, don't worry, I'm still doing my calls and I'm channeling your voice.
Yes.
Or I hear you in my head, or you're sitting on my shoulder. Right. And,
Yes.
that for me is I don't want it to be creepy. I want it to be cheerleading.
Yeah.
And it's true. Like, I believe so much in them.
Mm-hmm.
And once we have practiced and talked it through, I have total confidence that they can go and do these calls. The person that I'm working with can do it. We're ready. They're ready, right? We are at it to the point where they're 100% ready. And so I know that so much that I do hear from them that they feel that confidence, that they feel my experience and my confidence in them when they're going to do the call.
Yeah.
And that's, I had that when I got started. I had
Mm-hmm.
someone who believed in me and what I was doing enough that I borrowed their belief in me when I went into the first few meetings, right? That they believed I wasn't going to fail. I was going to be fine.
Mm-hmm.
Whatever happened, we'd figure out a solution. And I try to impart that to my clients and to the people I mentor out in the world. And I think it's just so valuable to have somebody like that in your corner, whether they're, hired or voluntary or a friend, because it can be lonely, and some days you just wake up and you just don't feel like you've got it. And then you can call that person and they remind you how great you are and how much you do have it. And you can
and, I think we think when we become adults that we don't need that help anymore. As you were talking, I'm thinking, back in T-ball days, they didn't just put the T-ball out there and give you the bat and say, go for it. Literally they were around your shoulders holding the bat with you, and I think we forget that a lot of these skills as we move into senior managers and leaders and, asking for money, dealing with conflict, there's so many things that we've never been trained on. And we think, especially as women, that we cannot admit we don't know or that we're not confident at it. But all that does is keeps us ignorant and keeps us feeling frustrated and holding ourselves back. So asking for help is an incredibly important positive skill that you can have. And, when Heather and I were talking to prepare for this, we were saying it doesn't even have to be that the person knows you. And it doesn't even have to be a person that you see or that they're even alive. It can be in a book. It can be, I often do a visualization with people to get them to see sort of their future self, which goes back to point one. Who are you becoming? What would the decision be if you were that person right now? Or how would that person spit that out? So you can have coaches and mentors in a ton of different ways.
Yeah, no, I love that because I actually, within my space specifically, there aren't a ton of women. There's a lot of female fundraisers, but within corporate fundraising, there's less. And it's not unusual for certainly the person on the other side of the desk to be a man. And so, it is useful to look for people who are outside to your specific sector or your specific circle and be like inspired by them. Right. And so it's, then it's not only coaching and mentoring, it's also being inspired. I did want to jump on one thing you mentioned, this idea of asking for help. And I think one of the things that often is selected as the way is a shadowing situation where the person goes in with you.
Okay. Say more.
So I'm going to sort of pro and con it a little bit. Sometimes it is helpful to go to meetings with somebody else and watch what they do and see what they do. And at the very beginning, that can be a good way to go.
Yeah.
I do really believe that at some point you kind of have to go it alone, right?
That's why it's courage, right?
Yeah. And so I am always really encouraging people to, be mindful that there's times that it's good to bring someone along, but also not to fall into the trap of that being how you get out of actually doing this. And I do see that, there's probably somebody else who I need because of X, Y, and Z. And I'm
Yes.
always like, really? Do you need
Yeah.
them for that? Or is it that you're scared or you're
That's your
not
crutch.
ready? Yeah.
Yeah.
And we do see this divide along gender not
Yeah.
infrequently. So
Yeah. Yeah.
I would say, mentor, yes, coach, yes, practice, yes. Be careful you're not bringing someone along with you to avoid taking it on
Yeah.
yourself.
I love that because courage is not the absence of fear, it's moving through fear. And
Mm-hmm.
so, yeah, by having someone hold your hand all the time, you're never going to move through that fear on your own. It really, that's what courage is just like doing it.
Mm-hmm.
It's, and honestly, I mean, I think of all of the times that I was terrified of a situation. Once I got through the first like 3 minutes or 5 minutes, the rest, I'm not going to say it was always easy, but the path sort of smoothed out a little bit. It's
Right. Yeah.
that first, like you said, that 10 minutes before the meeting started, that was like,
Mm-hmm.
that's, for me, that's always the worst, is that small talk at the beginning, because I just feel like you said, I'm not prepared for it. It comes back to that practice piece, which is
Yeah.
something you can do, right? Prepare for the small talk.
Well, I absolutely do coach on that now, right?
Yeah.
Like I learned
Yeah.
from my mistakes. I'm ready on that. And actually, I know you've seen me speak before, and often I'll tell some totally irrelevant pieces of information about myself right at the beginning,
Yeah.
with that absolutely in mind. Like it makes it easier for people to
Yeah.
know that I have a son who plays hockey, I have a dog, I live in the
Yes.
country. Like these are pieces of information. I travel, like not
Yeah.
now, but usually. So these are things that gives people something to talk to me about.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's true for your corporate
Yeah.
partner or your donor or whatever. If you don't tell them anything about yourself,
Yeah.
then there is only traffic and weather
Yeah.
available,
And that,
right?
yeah.
Or if you're sports, depending on
Yeah. Politics,
so
maybe, which isn't
yeah,
probably a good one to get into
right.
either.
So offer up the things that
Yeah.
that are interesting
Hmm.
without being overly personal. So
Yeah. Yeah.
if
I
you're
mean,
not there,
even I was listening to this podcast on the way over, or I'm reading this book, or,
right? Yeah.
something. Yeah.
But
Yeah.
having a few of those in your back pocket, super helpful, right?
Yes.
Because yes, if all you've planned for is the formal part of the meeting,
Yeah.
then that everybody's sort of sitting around looking at each other during this beginning part, and that's not how you want to start.
When I first moved into leadership, one of the things that I really disliked was the networking piece. And so, one of the very first things I did is I went to the library and grabbed like 5 books on how to work the room. And so that comes back to that competence part. And one of the strategies was, yeah, write down 3 topics or whatever on a little note card before you go in. Maybe it's you memorize the quote, or, yeah, like whatever it is, maybe check the news. What's the most recent news story out there? Oh, did you hear about the plane crash that just happened, and we lost one of the snowbirds. Were you a snowbirds fan? Whatever. It doesn't even have to be really personal,
No.
but the point is you have to practice this stuff. That's the competence part, and doesn't just magically happen. And then you have to have the courage to open your mouth and like let something
That's
out.
it. Yeah, say it. That's right. That's right.
Yeah. All right, Heather, this has been a fabulous conversation. Let's quickly review the 3 points. Do you want to go over them real quick again?
Sure. It's have a vision that gets you through to the other side. You want to get through this. You want to achieve this goal. You want to have micro steps. So you're not always thinking about the big things, but what's the little next thing that's very manageable, that's just in front of you? And third, mentors, coaches, people that can help you. Surround yourself with them. They can be your best cheerleaders. They can help you if it goes crap. They're there too, and figure out a next step anyway. So yeah, find your people.
Perfect. So speaking of which, tell people where they can find you, because there are some people who definitely need you on their team.
Well, I'd love that. So my company is Bridraise, bridraise.com. I also am at Bridraise on Facebook. I tweet. I have lots of toolkits and opportunities. I'm actually running a workshop tomorrow, which is corporate fundraising for boards, which is a really tight session on corporate fundraising, what it is, and really helping boards decide if it's for their charity and their organization. So I'm thinking fundraisers are going to listen to it first and pass it on to their boards. So
yes,
that's for them. But if there's
is
other things,
is that at bridraise.com?
yes, you can get there. You get information on that through bridraise.com for sure. And and of course, if anything we've talked about today interests you, then send me a note. I know that Kathy will put the links below to get it so they can get in touch.
Yeah, perfect. Anything we've missed covering? Anything you want to add?
No, I think that this was a great conversation, and I really hope more of you feel comfortable to have those money conversations, whether it's for fundraising or negotiating a great salary or whatever money conversations in front of you. Believe in yourself, and you can do it for sure.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Heather, for being here today. Okay. And yes, you will find all of the links in the notes.
Thank you.
If you found today's episode helpful, then you are going to love the training library. Many women leaders in nonprofits wish that they had a coach or a mentor to help them, but they don't believe that they or their organization can afford it. Oh, but you can. Inside of the Training Library membership site, you will not only get access to affordable and easily accessible ongoing personal and professional development training, you will also have access to a leadership coach at your fingertips. That way, when you hit those inevitable challenges that leadership will bring your way, you'll have both the resources and the support to navigate your way through them with confidence, composure, and while keeping your integrity intact. To find out more, head to kathyarcher.com/library. If you are enjoying the show, I'd love it if you could leave me a comment or a review on iTunes or wherever you listen to your podcasts. Thanks for listening. Go make the rest of your day awesome.